At night, the battle for Mount Austin had cost the regiment dearly. Weeks of brutal jungle fighting, dozens killed, hundreds wounded. By early January, the western slopes were finally secured. But the fight shifted. Instead of bunkers and fixed defenses, Japanese forces melted into the jungle. Some became snipers. They used scoped Arisaka rifles and knew the terrain intimately. They hid high in massive banyan trees, sometimes 80 or 90 feet above the ground. On January 19th, one American soldier was shot while filling canteens. On January 20th, 2 more were killed on patrol. On January 21st, 3 died, one from a shot fired from a tree the patrol had already passed twice. The battalion commander summoned George. He needed someone who could shoot. George calmly listed his credentials. Illinois State Championship at 1,000 yards in 1939. Tight shot groupings at 600 yards. Proven precision under match conditions. The commander gave him until morning to prove whether that mail-order rifle could solve the problem. At dawn on January 22nd, George positioned himself inside the abandoned bunker overlooking the groves. No spotter, no radio operator. Just his rifle, 60 rounds of ammunition, and a canteen. The Lyman scope offered modest magnification, but it was enough to detect subtle movement. The jungle was alive with noise birds, insects, distant artillery. George ignored it. He scanned tree by tree, branch by branch. At exactly 9:17 a.m., he saw movement. A slight shift in a banyan tree 240 yards out. No wind. He adjusted for drift, controlled his breathing, squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked. A Japanese sniper fell nearly 90 feet through branches before striking the ground. George cycled the bolt and waited. At 9:43, he spotted a second sniper moving in a nearby tree, attempting to reposition after hearing the shot. George led the movement and fired. George didn't hesitate. He grabbed his Winchester and sprinted north just as another round slammed into the bunker, reducing it to splintered debris. Dirt and shattered timber filled the air where he had been seconds before. He dove behind the fallen tree 120 yards away and resumed scanning. The dynamic had changed. This was no longer simple counter-sniping. It was a duel. At 2:23 p.m., he identified another sniper shifting between branches. One shot, 7, at 3:41 p.m. A second target silhouetted briefly against the late afternoon sky. 8. 12 rounds fired over 2 days. 8 confirmed hits. The remaining 3 would be careful. On January 24th, George chose a new position before daylight. Not the bunker, not the fallen tree. Somewhere unexpected. He settled among rocks once used as a Marine machine gun nest, slightly elevated above the groves. From there he could look downward into foliage that concealed most ground observers. At 8:17 a.m., he located what appeared to be sniper number 9. The man was lower than usual, concealed inside palm fronds roughly 190 yards away. It looked too easy. George hesitated. After 3 days of losses, the surviving enemy snipers would not grow careless. This had the feel of bait. Instead of firing, he widened his search. Tree by tree, branch by branch. 11 long minutes passed. At 8:28, he found the real threat high in a banyan tree nearly 90 feet up, positioned to cover the palm. The palm sniper was a decoy. George made his decision. He fired at the decoy first. The man fell. Instantly, George shifted to the banyan tree. As predicted, the concealed sniper reacted to the sound, turning toward it. Movement. Crosshairs aligned. Second shot. The real sniper dropped. 10. Outnumbered, low on ammunition, George broke contact and withdrew north toward American lines. After nearly 2 minutes of sprinting through vines and gunfire, he reached per threat in the Point Cruz groves was over. The rifle they had laughed at had done what an entire battalion could not. But George's war was far from finished. After the fighting at Point Cruz, George expected a brief rest. Instead, his success created a new responsibility. Division headquarters wanted results replicated. Within days, George was ordered to organize a formal sniper element inside the regiment. 14 scoped Springfield rifles were gathered from Marine stocks left behind on Guadalcanal. 40 men who had previously qualified as expert marksmen were assembled. Most of them could shoot well on a range. None of them had hunted men in trees. George started with fundamentals: breathing discipline, trigger control, patience, concealment, movement after firing, never shooting twice from the same place if it could be avoided. He emphasized something more important than marksmanship: restraint. A sniper who rushed died. Within 3 days of field exercises, 32 of the 40 could consistently hit man-sized targets at 300 yards under jungle conditions. George divided them into two-man teams, shooter and observer, so no one operated alone. By early February, the teams began clearing Japanese stragglers west of the Matanakal River. In their first coordinated day of operations, multiple enemy soldiers were eliminated along supply trails without a single American casualty. The psychological effect was immediate. Japanese movement in daylight decreased sharply. Then, on February 7th, during another operation near the river, George was hit. A rifle round tore through his left shoulder, spinning him to the ground. The bullet passed cleanly through muscle, without shattering bone, but the impact ended his field operations. He was evacuated to a field hospital near Henderson Field. By the time he was cleared for light duty, the Japanese evacuation of Guadalcanal was underway. The campaign ended days later. But the war was expanding. While recovering, George learned he had been selected for a new assignment: long-range jungle operations in Burma. The mission was classified. He volunteered immediately. In April 1943, George arrived in India as part of a developing unit that would eventually become known as Merrill's Marauders. The concept was bold. Small, highly mobile forces would penetrate deep behind Japanese lines in northern Burma, disrupting supply routes and capturing key objectives, particularly the airfield at Myitkyina. There would be no heavy artillery, no tanks, no secure supply lines. Everything would be carried on backs or pack animals. The men trained in extreme heat and humidity, preparing for months of movement through mountains and dense jungle. George modified his equipment. His Winchester Model 70 had performed flawlessly on Guadalcanal, but Burma required lighter loads. He replaced components where possible to reduce weight and switched to a lighter scope. Every ounce mattered on marshes that could stretch hundreds of miles. In February 1944, the Marauders crossed into Burma. The terrain was brutal: steep ridges, thick vegetation, rivers that swallowed men and mules alike. Malaria spread quickly. Dysentery weakened entire platoons. More men collapsed from disease than from bullets. But the unit kept moving. In the first weeks, they marched over 80 miles through mountainous jungle. Engagements were brief and violent ambushes at close range, rapid withdrawals before the enemy could mass forces. This was not the kind of war where a sniper rifle dominated. Most firefights happened at 50 yards or less. Still, George's rifle found its moments. At over 400 yards, he eliminated a Japanese officer directing troops across a river crossing. On another occasion, he silenced the machine gun position that had pinned down an advancing patrol. Each time, he fired once and moved immediately. The distinctive crack of his rifle could not be repeated from the same place. The campaign dragged on for months. By late spring, the Marauders had marched hundreds of miles through nearly impassable terrain. Casualties from illness mounted. The unit that began the campaign was reduced dramatically in strength. In May 1944, after exhausting combat operations, American forces captured Myitkyina airfield. Strategically, it was a major victory. Physically, the Marauders were spent. George survived the Burma campaign, but the toll was clear. His rifle, which had dominated the groves of Guadalcanal, had been used sparingly in Burma's chaotic close-range jungle warfare. He began to understand something important. Modern warfare was evolving. Precision still mattered, but increasingly, mobility, coordination, and standardization mattered more. Bolt-action rifles were giving way to semi-automatics. Individual skill remained critical, but wars were now decided by logistics and industrial scale. By mid-1944, George was evacuated with the rest of the weakened unit. The Marauders were disbanded. He was reassigned to training duties in the United States. At Fort Benning, Georgia, he instructed infantry officers in jungle tactics, marksmanship, and small unit leadership. He passed along hard-earned lessons: how to detect movement in foliage, how to relocate after firing, how patience could defeat superior numbers. His Winchester remained with him, but he would never again use it in combat. The rifle that had cleared Point Cruz and traveled through Burma was now a teaching tool rather than a weapon of war. Yet its story was far from over. By the summer of 1944, George's combat service overseas had ended. He returned to the United States thinner, scarred, and carrying experiences few could understand. The Army promoted him and assigned him to Fort Benning, where he trained young infantry officers preparing for deployment to Europe and the Pacific. In classrooms and on rifle ranges, he spoke about discipline more than heroics. He explained how jungle warfare punished impatience, how a single careless movement could reveal a position, how the man who waited often survived longer than the man who rushed. He rarely mentioned numbers. He rarely mentioned Point Cruz, and he never described the feeling of seeing movement in a tree and knowing only one of two men would walk away. The Winchester Model 70 remained in his possession. It had traveled from Illinois to Tennessee, across the Pacific to Guadalcanal, through India, across the mountains of Burma, and back again. It had endured humidity, mud, rain, and salt air. It had proven something important, not just about marksmanship, but about preparation. A civilian rifle, privately purchased and mocked by peers, had changed the outcome of a battlefield problem no one else had solved. But the war was larger than any single rifle. As 1945 approached, American forces advanced across Europe and the Pacific. Industrial production reshaped modern combat. Standardization replaced individuality. Semi-automatic rifles became universal. Specialized sniper training programs slowly formalized across the military. George watched the shift with interest. He understood it. Warfare was becoming faster, more mechanized, more coordinated. The age of the independent rifleman solving problems alone in the jungle canopy was fading. In January 1947, he left active service. His final rank reflected steady advancement. His decorations included recognition for bravery and service. But medals were not what defined him. He returned to civilian life and pursued higher education under the GI Bill. He excelled academically, studying politics and international affairs. Graduate work followed overseas. Years later, he would become involved in policy work and international relations, far removed from jungle battlefields. For a long time, he did not speak publicly about the details of Guadalcanal or Burma, but in 1947 he began writing. Not to glorify combat, not to build a legend. He wanted to document what he had learned about rifles, ballistics, jungle tactics, Japanese weapon systems, and the realities of small unit warfare. The manuscript grew into a detailed account of practical lessons drawn directly from experience. It was technical, methodical, and unembellished. When it was eventually published under the title Shots Fired in Anger, it became respected among serious students of military history and firearms development. The book avoided dramatics. It focused on what worked, what failed, and why. Over time, it earned a quiet reputation as one of the most precise first-hand accounts of jungle combat written by an American officer of the Second World War. George lived long enough to see the evolution of American military rifles from the M1 Garand to the M14 to the M16 and beyond. He saw sniping become a formalized military specialty with structured schools, doctrine, and dedicated equipment. Many of those developments reflected lessons learned the hard way in places like Guadalcanal. He passed away in January 2009 at the age of 90. The Winchester Model 70 that had once been mocked as a mail-order rifle was eventually donated to a national firearms museum. It rests today in a display case, unremarkable at first glance: wood stock, simple scope, classic lines. Visitors often walk past it without stopping. It does not look extraordinary, but it represents something larger. It represents preparation meeting opportunity, skill overcoming skepticism, patience defeating panic. In 4 days in January 1943, that rifle eliminated a sniper threat that had stalled an entire battalion. It demonstrated the value of disciplined marksmanship at a time when modern warfare was rapidly changing. More importantly, it demonstrated the mindset behind it. Equipment matters. Training matters more. Judgment matters most. John George's story is not about a rifle alone. It is about a man who refused to abandon preparation simply because others laughed at it. It is about adapting faster than the enemy. And it is about quiet competence, the kind that does not announce itself, but proves itself when needed most. Some stories fade because they are loud and dramatic. Others endure because they are precise and true. This one endured.